The chill in the air made my fingers ache as I wiped away the grime from an old tombstone. The cemetery, overgrown with weeds and half forgotten by the world, was the perfect subject for the Halloween exhibit I was hired to curate. Its decaying monuments to the dead had stood untouched for decades, their history buried in time. Perfect for my research, I thought. The caretaker had warned me that this place had a way of keeping secrets, but I chalked it up to superstitious nonsense. That's how I ended up here, surrounded by leaning headstones and cracked crypts, alone in the fading light of October. As I made my way deeper into the cemetery, something odd caught my eye. A patch of earth slightly sunken with no stone to mark it. Just an unremarkable patch of ground among the graves. But something about it was wrong. I knelt, curiosity pushing away the creeping unease that had begun to crawl up my spine. With a brush of my hand, I swept away the leaves and dirt, revealing the faint outline of a grave. No marker, no name, just a grave long forgotten. The wind picked up, whistling through the gnarled trees, and I felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the sense that I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like someone was watching me. I laughed at myself. Getting jumpy over nothing, I muttered, trying to shake off the strange feeling. I continued brushing away more dirt, but as I did, my fingers grazed something hard beneath the surface. I froze, my pulse quickening. There, just under the surface, was the corner of a wooden box. It looked old, impossibly old. I shouldn't have, but I started digging with my hands, pulling at the earth until the box was exposed. My heart raced with excitement. Maybe I'd found something important, an artifact, a piece of history waiting to be uncovered. With trembling fingers, I pried open the lid. Inside, there was a bundle of fabric, stained and rotting. I reached in and gently pulled it out, only to find it was a tattered dress, frayed at the edges and covered in dark stains, blood stains. My stomach lurched and I stumbled back, the sudden metallic stench overwhelming my senses. I heard a noise, a faint rustling like someone walking through the brush behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing. No one. The cemetery was empty, silent, but I could swear I felt eyes on me. I turned back to the box and the dress. My breath hitched in my throat. The dress was gone. Vanished. The box lay empty in the dirt. A sudden rush of footsteps pounded behind me, and before I could react, I felt a cold hand grasp my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around, but again, no one. My heart raced as I scanned the cemetery, my eyes darting between the trees and gravestones. There was no sign of anyone, but the air felt heavy now, oppressive. Something was watching. I could feel it. I stood backing away from the grave, ready to leave when I caught sight of something in the distance. A figure barely visible in the twilight, standing at the edge of the cemetery. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her head bowed, her long dark hair matted. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew she was watching me. I blinked and she was gone. Just like that, gone. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I told myself I had imagined it. That my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I turned to leave, I heard it. Whispers, faint and cold, coming from the grave. A voice. A woman's voice. "You have to find me," it said, barely more than a whisper carried on the wind. Before it's too late. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran, stumbling through the rows of graves, my heart pounding in my chest, the whispers chasing me all the way back to my car. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. She was there, sitting in the back seat, her hollow eyes staring at me. I screamed, but when I turned around, the back seat was empty. Nothing but silence, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. But I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. Not even close. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. I couldn't shake the image of the woman from my mind. She was there in the back seat, as real as anything I'd ever seen. But now she was gone, or was she? I drove away from the cemetery, the road ahead blurred by the rapid beating of my heart and the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. The whispers, the cold hand on my shoulder, the empty grave, the blood-stained dress, all of it played on a loop in my head, a cacophony of fear I couldn't silence. Back at home, I locked the door behind me as if that simple action could keep whatever it was at bay. I went straight to my desk, determined to make sense of what I had found. The cemetery's old records were spread out in front of me, papers filled with dates, names, and unmarked graves. My fingers traced over the faded ink, but there was nothing about a woman with a tattered dress or a grave without a marker. Hours passed, but I found nothing. Frustration mingled with fear, and I was on the verge of giving up when a sharp knock rang out. It echoed through the empty house, startling me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart dropped into my stomach, but I forced myself to get up and open the door. No one was there. I glanced up and down the street. Deserted? The air was still, too still. And then, just as I was about to turn back inside, I saw it. A single scrap of fabric fluttering in the wind. It was caught on the branch of a nearby tree, dark and stained, just like the dress I had found in the box. My stomach twisted in knots. I pulled it free, and as soon as my fingers touched the fabric, the whispers started again. This time louder, clearer. The same woman's voice, desperate and cold. "Find me," it repeated. Before it's too late, I dropped the fabric, backing away from the tree. My mind raced, torn between disbelief and terror. This couldn't be happening. I was rational, logical, a historian, not someone who believed in ghosts or curses. But I couldn't deny what I was seeing, what I was hearing. That woman wanted something from me. No, demanded it. And I had no idea how to stop her. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, gaunt, hollow, and filled with a rage that chilled me to the bone. The more I tried to push it away, the stronger it became, until I could no longer tell where my dreams ended and reality began. At some point in the night, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across the wooden floor just outside my bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. I lay there paralyzed, listening as the footsteps grew closer, then stopped right outside my door. Silence. I waited, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the inevitable. Then the door creaked open. I wanted to scream, to move, but I couldn't. I was trapped, frozen in place as a shadow moved into the room. It was her. The woman stood at the foot of my bed, her head still bowed, her dress now even more ragged, the bloodstains darker. Her long, tangled hair hung over her face, obscuring her eyes. But I knew she was watching me. I could feel her gaze, burning into me, even though I couldn't see it. "Find me," she whispered, her voice low and guttural, "or you will take my place." Her words sent a jolt of terror through my body, finally snapping me out of my paralysis. I scrambled out of bed, my back pressed against the wall. But she didn't move. She just stood there like a statue, her form barely visible in the dim light of the room. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" Her head tilted slightly, and for the first time I saw her eyes, hollow black pits that seemed to swallow the light. My skin crawled, a deep sense of dread settling into my bones. "You know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You found my grave. You disturbed my rest." I shook my head. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know. It doesn't matter," she interrupted, her voice growing louder. "You have until Halloween. If you don't find me, if you don't uncover the truth, you will take my place in the ground." The room suddenly grew cold, so cold that I could see my breath hanging in the air. The woman's figure began to fade, her body flickering like a candle in the wind. But before she vanished completely, her final words rang in my ears, chilling me to my core. "Tick-tock, Rachel. Time is running out." And then she was gone. I stood there, trembling, the silence of the house deafening around me. But as I tried to steady my breathing, I heard something else, a faint sound, barely noticeable at first, but growing louder by the second. Scratching. It was coming from under the floorboards. A long, drawn-out scraping like fingernails clawing at the wood. And it was coming closer. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Each clawing scrape sent waves of panic coursing through me. It was coming from beneath the floor, inching its way toward me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my ears, my eyes darting across the room. My legs felt heavy, as though fear had anchored me to the ground. I couldn't move, couldn't think until, crack. A floorboard snapped, splintering with a sickening pop, and the sound of something wet and heavy dragged against the wood. I felt bile rise in my throat as a pale hand emerged through the crack. Its fingers were twisted, the skin raw and bruised. They clawed at the wood, desperately trying to pull the rest of the body free. I turned and bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The house groaned in protest, like it too was alive, trying to hold me back. I barely made it down the stairs, nearly tripping as I grabbed my phone. My hands shook so violently I could hardly dial. But as I frantically tried to call someone, anyone, the screen went dark. "The phone died?" "God, no," I muttered, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. My pulse roared in my ears as I spun around, desperate for a way out. The front door, yes, the front door. If I could just make it outside, maybe... My thoughts were cut short by a deep, echoing thud. The house trembled, as if something immense had just shifted underneath it. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head toward the stairwell, praying I wouldn't see what I already knew was there. Standing at the top of the stairs, her black eyes fixed on me, was the woman. Her dress dragged along the floor, filthy and torn, the bloodstains growing darker. Her mouth hung open, a twisted, grotesque grin spreading across her face. I felt the air shift, heavy and thick, as though the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. You can't run, she rasped. Her voice was like nails on a chalkboard grinding against my ears. I backed away, feeling for the door handle behind me. My fingers fumbled, slipping on the cold brass. She started to descend the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. You disturbed my grave, she continued, her voice echoing unnaturally, growing louder with each step. Now I'll take what's mine. I yanked open the door, ready to flee, when suddenly everything stopped. The air, the sounds, even the woman at the top of the stairs, all of it froze in place as if time itself had stalled. For one breathless moment I stood there, caught between escape and whatever horrors awaited me if I stayed. And then I saw it. Outside, beyond the threshold, was not the familiar street. It wasn't the yard or the road or anything that should have been there. Instead, it was the cemetery. Asterisk, asterisk, her asterisk, asterisk cemetery. The rows of graves stretched out before me, the trees looming like skeletal hands in the dim moonlight. The unmarked grave, the one I had disturbed, stood right in front of me, freshly dug, the earth still raw and wet. The open coffin lay waiting, as though it had always been meant for me. A cold gust swept through the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I was trapped, standing in front of the grave I never should have found. Behind me, the house creaked and groaned again. I turned to face the woman, still at the top of the stairs, still grinning that twisted grin. Her body moved unnaturally now, jerking with quick, erratic motions. "You've seen it now," she hissed, her voice growing harsher, more desperate. "There's no going back." Suddenly, the floor beneath me began to rumble. I looked down in horror as cracks splintered through the wooden boards, the ground beneath me giving way. The dirt from the cemetery poured in, swallowing the floor, creeping up my ankles. I tried to move, but my feet were stuck. The dirt was dragging me down, pulling me toward the grave. "No!" I screamed, clawing at the ground, trying to break free. But the harder I struggled, the deeper I sank. The dirt climbed higher, cold and suffocating, until I could feel it around my knees, then my waist. My hands slipped, unable to find any purchase on the shifting ground. The woman was closer now, her face inches from mine. Her breath was icy, and I could smell the decay on her skin, the rot of something long dead. "Find the truth," she whispered, her black eyes boring into mine. "Or join me in the earth." I tried to scream again, but the dirt filled my mouth, choking me. The world spun as I was pulled deeper into the ground, my vision fading to black. And then, just as the last of the dirt covered my face, everything stopped. I was lying on the floor, the room around me still and silent. The grave was gone. The woman was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I gasped for air, clawing at my throat. I was still in my house. But something had changed. Something was wrong. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented, my legs shaking beneath me. I needed to get out, to leave, but as I reached for the door, a cold hand gripped my ankle. I looked down, and there, half buried in the floor, was the woman again. But this time her face was different. It wasn't just twisted with rage or hatred. It was asterisk me. Asterisk. Her face was my own. Smiling. Grinning that same grotesque grin. "You're almost out of time," she said, her voice now sounding disturbingly like mine. "Halloween is near." Her hand tightened around my ankle, and I screamed. But there was no one to hear it. Part 4. Asterisk. The Forgotten Grave asterisk. I bolted upright, my body drenched in cold sweat. The echo of my scream hung in the air, but everything around me was silent. I was still in my house, the same floorboards beneath me, the same dim light filtering through the windows. But something felt different. I glanced down at my ankle, expecting to see the woman's cold, twisted hand gripping me, pulling me back into the earth. But there was nothing. No dirt, no grave, no twisted version of myself. Just my ankle, sore but free. I took a shaky breath, standing up on wobbly legs. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The woman, the ghost, whatever she was, had made it clear. Time was running out, and Halloween was only hours away. I wasn't sure what would happen if I didn't uncover the truth, but I wasn't about to wait and find out. Determined, I grabbed my laptop and dove back into the cemetery records. There had to be something I missed. I combed through the documents, my fingers moving quickly over the keyboard, searching for any mention of unmarked graves or missing women. The woman in the tattered dress couldn't be a figment of my imagination. She was real, and I was going to find out who she was. After what felt like hours, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, I found it. A small forgotten entry buried in the town's archives. It was an old death record dated nearly a century ago. A woman, unnamed, had been buried in the cemetery after her body was found near the edge of town. No family claimed her, no one came to mourn. Her cause of death was listed as unknown, though the notes suggested foul play. Her grave was left unmarked. This was her. My heart raced as I scrolled further through the records. There were whispers of a cover-up, mentions of a man, a local figure, who had been involved in her death but never brought to justice. Her name had been erased from history, her memory buried with her. She had been forgotten, until now. I grabbed my coat, rushing out the door, my breath visible in the crisp autumn air. I drove back to the cemetery, the road stretching out before me like a shadowy corridor. The night was eerily still, the trees swaying softly in the wind as I pulled up to the entrance. The cemetery loomed ahead, darker than ever, but I wasn't afraid this time. I knew what I had to do. I made my way back to the unmarked grave, the place where everything had started. The earth was disturbed, as if something had been clawing its way out, but I ignored the chills creeping up my spine. I knelt before the grave, pulling out the old record I had found, and began to speak. "I know who you are now," I said softly, my voice trembling. "You weren't forgotten. They tried to erase you, but I found you." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The wind stilled, the air heavy with anticipation. Then from the shadows she appeared. The woman in the tattered dress, her ghostly figure pale and flickering, stood before me. But this time there was no malice in her eyes. The twisted grin was gone, replaced by a look of sorrow, of longing. "You've uncovered the truth," she whispered, her voice soft now, almost gentle. "You've given me back my name." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "What was your name?" I asked, the question lingering in the air. A tear slid down her cheek as she spoke. "Elizabeth," she said. "My name was Elizabeth." The moment the name left her lips, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. The oppressive weight of the cemetery lifted, and the air felt lighter, clearer. The darkness that had once clung to the place like a shroud was gone. "Thank you," Elizabeth whispered, her form flickering in the dim light. "You've freed me." I stood, my body trembling but no longer from fear. Will you be at peace now?" I asked. She nodded, her once terrifying presence now calm, serene. "Yes, you've given me what they took from me, a name, a place in history. I can rest now." Elizabeth's figure began to fade, her translucent form dissolving into the night. But before she disappeared completely, she looked at me one last time, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You were never meant to take my place," she said gently. "You were meant to give me back what was mine. Thank you." And with that, she was gone. The cemetery fell silent, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. I stood there for a long moment, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. But the fear that had gripped me was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. I had done it. I had uncovered the truth. And in doing so, I had freed Elizabeth's spirit. As I turned to leave, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A small, delicate gravestone now stood where the unmarked grave had been. Carved into the stone was a single word, ***, Elizabeth ***. I smiled, a sense of closure washing over me. The terror was over, and Elizabeth could finally rest in peace. I walked back to my car, the weight that had been pressing down on me for days lifted. The cold October night no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt like a fresh start. As I drove away from the cemetery, I knew that this chapter had finally come to an end. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly free.